go to nashville.gov/NPC. And at the bottom, you'll be able to click the link for this meeting. It's also being streamed on Metro Nashville Network's Channel 2 and on their Metro Nashville Network's Facebook page live. So so please join those ways so you can view the presentation. And if you have neighbors, community members that you know are interested that might be able to hop on tonight, please do. Additionally, this is being recorded and will be posted on the Planning Department's webpage and on Metro Nashville Network's YouTube channel. So folks who may miss this event can watch the recording. So I'm going to start with a few introductions. I want to start with the council members and Councilman Rosenberg, whose district this property is in. I see he's been able to join us. And I know that Councilmember Hauser is trying to join us. And so we'll hopefully hear from her once she's able to join us. Her district is just outside of this particular piece of property. So Councilman Rosenberg, did you want to say anything as we get started?
Sure. Thanks, Anna. Thank you for putting this together. Thanks everybody for being on tonight for this initial meeting about this proposal. Really eager to hear everybody's feedback on it, thoughts. My hope is that the community benefits are such that we can find a way forward with this, but I'm really just eager to hear all the information that's out there and appreciate everybody being involved in the process.
Thanks, Councilman. And as I said, I'll try to spot when Council Lady Hauser hops on and so we can hear from her. But there are a few members of planning staff helping me tonight. So I am the case reviewer for this community plan amendment. Another staff member, Logan Elliott, is on the call and he is reviewing the rezoning request. And then Anita McKegg, who works with me in our community plans division, is also on the call from planning. And then hopefully you can see on your screen, there's a list of the applicant team, representatives from Reagan Smith and from Cypress Brook. And you will be hearing a presentation from the applicant team shortly, and then they'll be available to answer questions. So let me move us into our logistics. So the best way to ask questions on this WebEx call is either to type them in the Q&A panel, and I will pull up a graphic to show you where that's located. You can also, when we get to the Q&A portion, there's a raise your hand icon that's next to your name. You can also click on that, and that will allow our ITS department to unmute you so you can verbally ask your question. So please, if you want to type questions in, please do so at any time during this presentation, and then we'll kind of go through them in order once we get to Q&A. As I said, if you're on the phone, unfortunately, the technology is such that you can only listen, but you can also email me any follow-up questions that you come across as you go through this presentation or following. Everybody's audio is muted, and Metro ITS will be controlling the unmute. And as I said, the meeting is being recorded. But here's a little graphic for how to do the Q&A and the raise your hands. So the Q&A tool is at the right side of your screen at the bottom. You can please when you type your question, please send it to all so that all the panelists can view the question. And then, as I said, once we do Q&A, if you would rather be unmuted, there's the raise your hand icon next to your name. I've had several community members reach out to me with questions and concerns, both through phone calls since the meeting notice went out and emails. So I know that there are plenty of questions. So I want to make sure we have plenty of time for that. And I will kind of recap these instructions once we get to that portion of the evening. The agenda for tonight, so I'm going to describe the purpose for the meeting, provide some background information on community planning in Nashville and how policy and zoning are different. and then I'll introduce the proposed land use policy change, and the applicant will present, and then we'll open it up for questions and discussion.
Hi,
So-
Anna. Anita here.
Yeah. Hey, Anita.
Councilmember Hauser is joined as an attendee. Sade, can we move her up to a panelist?
Let's see. Councilmember Hauser, can you hear us?
Okay, yes, I can hear you. They just let me in the building, so I won't be out in the heat, and I'm going to switch over to my computer, hopefully. I'll be on the phone until I can get my computer up and going.
Okay, we were just getting started, so I didn't know if you wanted to say a few words now or just wait until you got settled in.
Well, what I wanted to say is I really appreciate having the meeting and having planning as part of that, because I know there are various questions that you guys are the experts that can help us with. And I'll kind of save my questions till towards the end of what I've been hearing. And thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so I'm going to continue on with the presentation. So the applicant team submitted applications to Metro to change the land use policy and zoning for a property at 1084 Morton Mill Road. It's very early in the review process for these applications, and the planning department is hosting tonight's meeting to explain the requested changes to the Bellevue Community Plan and provide an opportunity for community members to ask questions, express concerns, and let us know your thoughts. So the input received at this meeting weighs heavily into planning's recommendation to the Planning Commission, and I'll be listening and making notes on the questions and comments we've received tonight. In general, the process is that we have one or more community meetings depending on the need and the concerns raised, and that all weighs into the recommendation that I write to the planning commissioners when this case is heard at the Planning Commission. So I just want to make sure that we're all familiar with the site. The request involves the property that's outlined with the red dashed line here at the terminus of Morton Mill Road. We're by the intersection of I-40 and Highway 70. So north of the railroad tracks that currently are at the terminus of Morton Mill Road, and south of Coley-Davis Road that runs along I-40 within this bend of the Harpeth River next to some soccer fields and the commercial activity at 1 Bellevue Place. Once again, we have the applicant's request outlined in red, and adjacent to a property that has been given to Metro for parks, and which will change to open space policy to keep that within the park function. So I'm sure you were familiar before, but that was just some good orientation of which exact property piece that we're discussing tonight. I want to just quickly go through some background on community planning in Nashville. And since the late 80s, Nashville has used community plans as a means of applying Nashville Next, which is our countywide long-range plan, which is very broad. And so within Nashville Next are 14 community plans. They're shown on your screen, and they're tailored to the issues and needs of each community. These plans, along with other planning documents, guide where development and preservation should occur in each community. So the area we're discussing tonight has the star on it here in Bellevue, in the Bellevue Community Plan. And these plans are created with the community and adopted by the Planning Commission and updated with the community. So they're not intended to be stagnant documents that are just snapshots in time. Rather, they have the ability and there's a process for them to be amended. So in order to implement the vision that we have in those community plans, we use land use policy, which is what we're discussing tonight. That policy addresses the form and character of development. And every property in Nashville has a land use policy on it. And each policy is defined in our community character manual. These policies are the standard by which future zone change requests are measured by the Planning Commission. We also use a tool called the Transect, which is a tool for categorizing, understanding, and guiding the various development patterns of a region from the most natural, T1, at the very top of your screen for open space, such as places like Bell's Bend and Beeman Park, which are entirely natural with no development within them, all the way to T6, which is our downtown, the most intensely developed part of Nashville. So you can see that I've highlighted the T2 rural and T3 suburban transects, because those are the transects that apply to Bellevue. And these policies are important because it's the guidance, as I mentioned, that all rezoning requests are measured against by the Planning Commission. So if a zoning request is supported by the existing policy, there's a higher likelihood that the Planning Commission will recommend approval. If the request is not supported by the existing policy, the Planning Commission is unlikely to recommend approval. So an applicant may apply to change a policy that does support the zoning request. So in this case, the applicant is requesting a zone change to a zoning that's not supported by the current policy. So along with their rezoning requests, they are applying to change the policy. And it's very different. Policy and zoning is different. So each property not only has a land use policy, but also has a zoning district applied to it. And the policies are the guidance and represent the vision for an area. And just changing policy does not change zoning. Zoning is the law and a set of regulations that control the physical development of land, including the land use, the density, the height, the setbacks, parking, access, etc. In this case, the land use policy is rural maintenance, and AR2A is the zoning, which is an agricultural zoning. The applicant is applying to change the zoning from agricultural to multifamily. And in order to do that, the land use policy also has to be changed from rural maintenance to a policy that allows multifamily residential, which in this case is suburban neighborhood evolving policy. So to dive into the specifics of this request, now that we have a background on planning in Nashville. So here's a map on your screen of the existing land use policies and the property outlined with the black dashed line. You'll see the light green, the very light green, is rural maintenance. And then the darker, slightly darker green next to it is conservation policy. So rural maintenance is a policy that supports low density residential and agricultural uses. When the Bellevue Community Plan was updated, the 2010 flood was very fresh in everyone's memory, and there was a great emphasis on keeping the floodplain within conservation policy. So that conservation policy reflects the extents of the floodplain here. And at the time of Bellevue Community Plan's update, the farms in the area, the property owners in the area were very intent on keeping their land as farmland. And so we applied rural maintenance policy. Additionally, the lack of access to this site meant that rural maintenance policy was appropriate. So that is the existing policies, and you'll see that the similarly are applied to this property next to it, which is now deeded to Metro Parks. So onto the request. The request is to change to allow a multifamily residential use here, and the applied for policy is suburban neighborhood evolving, which is a policy that allows for moderate density residential and institutional uses. It doesn't allow for any commercial or office or any type of use like that, just residential and some institutional uses. You can see that T3 Transect is applied to the majority of the neighborhoods surrounding this property in Bellevue. So you'll see that T3, and this is neighborhood maintenance. And that light yellow goes for a much wider area around this site for the residential suburban neighborhoods in Bellevue. And then you'll see the T3 Transect is also applied in this orange to the community center at 1 Bellevue Place, which has all the commercial uses there, the Home Depot, the Goodwill, etc. So the applicant has applied to change from the existing rural maintenance on this piece to neighborhood evolving, and the conservation policy that you see will remain reflecting where the floodplain boundaries are applied to. I'm now going to stop sharing my screen and pass it over to the applicant to give you a little more detail on the reason for the request. And then once they have finished their presentation, I will once again explain how to ask questions, and please do continue to be, I see some of you have been typing them in, and then we will get to that Q&A portion, but I will pass it over to Reagan Smith.
Hey, Anna, Anita again. Can I interrupt just briefly? We have some people asking about, can they please see other attendees? And I just want to respond to everyone that unfortunately WebEx does not allow attendees to see each other. So currently we have 49 attendees in addition to the panelists. We also had a question if this meeting is being recorded, and yes, it is, and you'll be able to view it at a later time. Thank you.
Thanks, Anita. Yes, and I will pass it over to Reagan Smith to give their presentation.
Thanks, Anna. I appreciate that intro and very, very helpful. I'm Alan Thompson with Reagan Smith and Associates. Have been part of Bellevue since I was 12 years old, so about 40 years now, and they go really, really quick. It's changed very much over the years. And really, I think for the better. And we look at the opportunity we have here tonight, and that's what I want to kind of relay to everybody who's kind of watching in. I know you kind of got a mailer here in the past couple of weeks, and there's a lot of questions that come with that. Hopefully, we're going to answer a lot of those questions in what we're proposing here tonight. You still may have more questions, but that's why we're here. This is our very first meeting, and that's what this meeting is for. We want to give information on what we would like to do, the opportunity that it would provide the community, and then definitely answer any questions or concerns that you may have. And we appreciate everybody taking the time out of their evening to sit in and part of this meeting. So Arizia Bellevue, is the name that we tagged to it at this point. So let's go to that next slide there, Scotty. All right, so Anna did a great job kind of showing you location of the site, what's it mean from a land use policy, and this is meant to be a land use policy meeting. We're going to give you much more detail so you have a clear understanding of why we're requesting a land use policy. But there's our site, and I wanted to zoom out to show the context of it, where it falls in our community. The hardest part about this site is access. And it's not just our site, but the site immediately to the west is Metro Park's site that was recently donated to them, roughly 51 acres. It also has very limited access. And that's what has made this site so difficult over the years. And to the south, you have CSX Railroad, which obviously that creates a barrier. And to really the northeast and west, you're surrounded by the Harpeth River. So how to get in there and how to appropriately access the site has been a challenge that our firm, Reagan Smith, has looked at really over the past 20 years with multiple people trying to answer that question. And so over 2 decades now, we've kind of been looking at that. So one thing I want to point out here is kind of the proximity of the site to the interstate, the proximity of the site to 1 Bellevue Place. And those are key components that I want everybody to kind of look at because it plays it plays a big role in who we are as a community and also our economic long-term sustainability. Scotty, okay, if you could go to the next slide there. All right, so this is a zoomed in version of it. The site that we are looking at is Mr. Fusel's property, which is 43.87 acres. And then immediately to our west is the Metro Park site, which is 51 acres plus or minus. And the land use that's being requested is being requested for us at T3, and it's being requested on the Metro parcel as OS, which is open space. All right, so this kind of gives you a view, and you can go back one, Scotty. So right now, both parcels are T2. And, you know, back when we looked at the plan, it makes sense. If you take access out of the equation, those parcels should fall within that land use. But if you add access to that equation, it's much more appropriate to look at the uses that we're proposing. Go to the next slide there, Scotty. So when you add access in, and we're going to get into detail of what that access looks like and what kind of impact it'll have on different people. I know we got people from Somerset Farms and people from Morton Mill, and we probably have some from River Plantation tuning in here as well. And it impacts everybody in a little different way. But so when you look at that, when we add access to the equation, now that property makes more sense as a T3 neighborhood evolving land use policy. And if you look, all the purple that's around, that's T3 policy. So we'd be very consistent with the surrounding policy that follows all around that area. Again, with no access, it doesn't make sense. But that's the key item that we want to focus on tonight. All right, if you go to the next slide here, Scotty. So Greenway connectivity. This is a big thing, and you know, we're looking at it from a community standpoint and access. The more access you have and the better opportunities you can move people from one place to another is the viability and the vibrancy of any community. And so we have a real opportunity here to connect a little area of Greenway. I don't know, I guess they can't see me on the cursor, but it's really along our eastern boundary. You can see there's a little break in the Greenway there. And so you're thinking, well, okay, big deal. What's that do? Well, that's a really big connection. That would connect the soccer fields area to the south, which that Greenway would run approximately 10.5 miles. You could go all the way to the beginning of Bellmead Boulevard from this point that we're seeing right here. And so, okay, that adds that connection. But if you look at all the neighborhoods and everything to the south of there, it gives them direct connection or to the soccer field area and also to the retail area, the Home Depot area and all that particular area as well. So it's a connection point. It's a very, very key connection point that helps pull together a more significant greenway that really helps interweave the fabric of Bellevue. And with that connection point, then you start looking even further to the west, and ideally you've got a greenway system that goes all the way to Riverwalk. And so I know that seems kind of far out there in the future, but you know, really you have to have that vision to pull these connections together in order to make it a reality. And I remember when the Greenway did come into Bellevue, and it was questionable when it came in. And I know today all the people that get on that Greenway on a sunny spring day or a nice fall day, it is a huge asset to who we are as a community. Great recreational feature. Just the fact that you can link to Edwin Warner, Percy Warner Park, which is the second largest urban park in America, second to that of Central Park in New York. that's a huge asset to our community. So I just wanted to bring that up because it's a big component of what this project will bring. All right, next slide there, Scotty. So this is the site itself. You can see here's the little loops that exist. The little green loop that you see to the top, that is a pedestrian bridge that crosses over, and it has a connection to a little field that's been carved out for an additional soccer field there. So it's kind of a little short Greenway run. That's what we'd be connected to. And you can see the little Greenway path to the south there. So connection is huge. Connectivity is just, that's the way you activate particular areas for a community. So what we're going to be talking about tonight is how we have an opportunity with an end user to come in that could bear the cost of a key connection that suddenly would activate 51 acres of park that we currently accessing at this point, or is there any good way to get to it? We're also going to talk about a dedication of future property that would be part of this project that would increase that area to the park. So we'd be looking at another 20 acres there. So that 20 acres, that's a key component because once that's dedicated to Metro Parks, the right of access for Greenway and connections are in place and in hand. And now you can look at that greater comprehensive plan and what it would do for us as a community. Now, the key aspect is that area you see right there in the middle. And I know a lot of y'all are thinking, okay, I thought that whole area floods. Well, the majority of it does. What you see in the green area, that is floodplain area that is dedicated. And Scotty will go more into the site review when we look at the existing conditions there. And you're like, well, you can't use that area anyway. Well, actually you can. The entire soccer field complex on the other side of the river, that is all floodway and floodplain. And so it's a great use for that type of active park. So there's just a lot of opportunities in what we could see a 51 acre turn into a 71 acre park, and huge connection options that really kind of pull our community together. And the way we have an opportunity to this is what we can do on that little strip that you see there in the center. And over the past 20 years, it was hard to make financial logical sense. But we're kind of at a point today in the Nashville market that this can make financial sense. And our client, Cypress Brook, who are in the top of their field and have developed across the country multiple successful communities, are here with that opportunity coming to us saying, you know what, we can bear the cost of this bridge. We can get access over here if we're able to execute a successful plan. And that's what you want. You want somebody who has done this time and time again, who understands the dynamics of integrating a residential development into a community. Now this is a very sensitive area. It's sensitive because of access. It's sensitive because of land ownership. Metro Parks is immediately to our west. The state of Tennessee owns all the soccer fields to the north of us, along Coley Davis there. CSX obviously owns the right of way to the south of us. So there's a lot of moving pieces and parts here, and we're going to have to do the right vetting process and communication with CSX, which we've started those conversations. We're going to have the right conversations with Metro Parks, which we've started those conversations as well. And we're going to have the right conversations with the state of Tennessee if we're going to take a bridge across their property. These are key conversations that we're going to have, but most importantly, we got to have that conversation with you. And that's why we're here tonight, to get your feedback and your input. Because From a green space standpoint and an activation of a significant greenway and park infrastructure for our community, this is probably the largest one I've been associated with ever in Bellevue. So Scotty, what's our next slide there is all right. So existing site conditions, and I'm gonna hand this over to Scotty Bernick. So Scotty Bernick is a PM here, one of the associates at Reagan Smith, and specialty is in site assessment, site layout, and planning. So Scotty, if you want to kind of take that.
Nice to meet everybody virtually here. Scotty Bernick. I'm a landscape architect and been at Reagan Smith for 16 or plus years. Also was a resident of the Bellevue community, so appreciate that area and know it well. Wanted to go through a few slides and go through the project, but initially when we look at a project, we do the site visit. So we went out there, walked the site, walked the adjacent greenways and some of the existing public right-of-ways that are in place there to sort of get an idea of what's going on. Second, we went ahead and did a field run Alta boundary survey so that we could lock down the exact coordinates of the boundary and have real-time information. Additionally, we consulted and had a field run topo survey done of the site. And that is extremely important as we're looking at the site and wanting to understand the elevations. Obviously, we know the sensitivity of the Harpeth River and the flooding that does occur along its corridor. So having the information to really assess the elevations and look at that and how that plays an effect was a really important part of it. We also consulted with BDY Environmental, and BDY did a regional constraints analysis. Essentially what that is it's an analysis where they investigate potential jurisdictional aquatic resources, basically streams, wetlands, or ponds. They also look to determine if there's potential for rare or threatened or endangered plant or animal habitats. Equally, they identify any kind of required buffers through local, state, or federal requirements. Based on their investigation and site visit, none of those, no streams, wetlands, or ponds were identified on the parcel. So that was sort of a good step in the right direction, specific to the site. And that was included for all of this property here, the 43.87 acres. Also wanted to sort of highlight some of these key elements before we go into the plan. I've highlighted in sort of a lighter blue, which aligns with the Harpeth River, is the floodway. And essentially that's the area within and immediately adjacent to the channel. It's reserved, from encroachment during these flood events. Equally, I've highlighted the 100-year floodplain in a little bit of the darker blue, and that's immediately adjacent to the floodway. Also here to the south in bright red is an existing TVA easement and transmission lines that somewhat vertically separate and horizontally separate the property a bit from the Morton Mill subdivision, as well as the CSX railroad tracks there. And then once we did a lot of this inventory and got a lot of the data, we started looking at the analysis of the project to identify site constraints, the developable footprint, the ingress, egress points, views, and open space opportunities. As Alan mentioned earlier in the presentation, there's an area here of the Fussell property that's well outside of the 100-year floodplain. And that's obviously the area that we've looked at and studied for development, leaving these other sensitive areas and I guess some of the dedication for these open spaces in the areas for the floodway and then the 100-year floodplain as well. In regards to access, there's an existing right of entry located right here at Morton Mill Road via an easement that crosses the CSX railroad into the site. As we looked at the project, and as Alan mentioned a little bit before of the land use and how it's evolved from 20 years ago to where we are here today, the design team, we looked at a means and methods of having a better ingress and egress that would basically provide access to the site directly to the main corridors of Highway 70 and I-40. So what we're showing here is the proposed bridge location that would connect to Coley Davis and then to here to the Fussell property. What this does is it crosses and it would span the floodway, and it would be set at an elevation higher than the 100-year floodplain. And just to put some dimensions in, this is about a half mile from Highway 70 and about 0.3 miles to Harpeth Springs. So here you can sort of see some blue dots that show that. The access to would also provide a vehicular access point to not only this property here, but additionally the 51-acre Metro property, as well as that 20 acres Alan mentioned earlier that is hopeful that would be dedicated to the city. In regards to the layout, we've kept some of those elements highlighted just so they're visible, and specifically I'm referring to the floodway, the floodplain as it relates to the site that we're looking at today. We're proposing a 417-unit multifamily development comprised mostly of 1 and 2 bedrooms with a few 3-bedroom units as well. In regards to uses and bulk regulations, and although this is a land use presentation and neighborhood meeting, we are obviously going into some details about the zoning part of it, but we know it's important to communicate that so that there's logic and reason behind a land use request. But I wanted to note that as part of another application, the zoning application, rezoning would be a preliminary SP, and that's essentially what we would be requesting the zoning to. And what that does is it sets your bulk regulations, your bulk densities, even your uses of your site. It becomes an ordinance, it becomes law, as Ms. Anna said. So what that means is what we're showing here, what we would present as part of the preliminary SP process and application, if approved and gone through, would be regulated and become law, meaning this couldn't change and become, for example, a large commercial district or something different without having to go through the process again. Also wanted to sort of highlight the building forms. We looked at this a little bit contextually. As we know, to our east, we have the Home Depot, Goodwill, Bed Bath & Beyond, and sort of this commercial district with residential to our south, some multifamily and single family directly to the west, with Harpeth River, Coley Davis, and I-40 to our north. But sort of looked as this property is very isolated in nature in terms of having a large wooded area with the Metro Park property. Our site is, and I didn't mention this during the inventory analysis, is it's primarily clear as was, for farmland. But looking at sort of the forms of the buildings, and again, as we look at how the building transitions, the first 2 buildings here, which I'm going to say are due north, closest to Coley Davis, are 4-story structures. And then the remaining 5 buildings, and the buildings are here in sort of a light yellow. The remaining 5 yellow buildings are 3-story. Again, sort of looking as we transition in height from the 4-story to the 3-story, then it goes down into the different areas. Additionally, we have sort of a loop drive. The gray area is parking, and that provides sort of a circular for fire access and good management. And then there's a handful of garages sort of sprinkled around the perimeter. They're also sort of a yellow tone, but a good bit smaller. And those are a 1-story structure. I also should note that the clubhouse and the pool the clubhouse would be integrated into this first building with more of the activated amenity space in the courtyard, with the remaining open spaces in the 3-story as more passive spaces for recreation. So again, sort of as the intensity goes from a little bit more activated to less activated, they're more passive-like as you go down, and also to the east. Here's just a blow-up of the proposed bridge. Just wanted to sort of highlight this because it helps sort of see it visually. You'll see sort of here to the right are the existing soccer fields that are in the floodway and the floodplain. And this would essentially span from Coley Davis all the way to this property here. And what we've proposed and looking at is a public right-of-way that would provide public access for the community for the large 51-acre metro tract plus the 20-acre dedication, as well as the property here that we were presenting to you today. I also wanted to note there is an existing access here from the Morton Mill subdivision, noted that earlier. And what we've looked at is providing an emergency only access, meaning this access would be gated so that I would say residents, sort of non-emergency type vehicles, wouldn't be able to cross through there. At the same time, having it gated and controlled would allow fire access, ambulance, emergency services to access both properties. And talking with the fire marshal about, points of ingress, points of egress, it's also a positive because the emergency access not only would provide, a secondary way into the proposed development. At the same time, if, a tree or something had fallen further at Morton Mill, it would allow emergency services to get to the homes sort of through the development that we just looked at. So it seemed sort of a win-win in terms of having almost little to no traffic other than emergency service as would be needed. So I also just want to note a few things sort of high level. The property, as I mentioned earlier, does contain area within the 100-year floodplain. This project will not increase flooding or cause a rise in the flood elevation. As part of this project, material from the floodplain, so a lot of that area that's in the bright green, would be removed, which would create more volume for flood water. So essentially, you're scooping material out. It helps it, not hurts it. So that's a benefit. The bridge access over the Harpeth River will be designed so that it does not impact the flood elevation during the 100-year event. Also, we're required by law, by stormwater regulations. We'll have to submit certificates required by FEMA to show that there's no rise. So there's multiple regulatory departments that review and assess, a development of any kind. Stormwater detention will be performed on site. The proposed detention ponds will hold back peak runoff rates to basically what's out there today. So meaning when a storm event rains as it sits there today, we're regulated and can't allow the flow to be more intense than it is out there today. So that's a stormwater requirement. We'll also have some water quality elements internally to the site. Those are within some of those passive open spaces internally into the courtyard. And the water quality would be something similar to like a bioretention that treats and cleans the water before it gets detained. Once it would get detained, it would then release at a designed rate towards where it naturally goes today. In regards to architecture, I just wanted to show a few illustrations here. A very high quality architecture for this Ariza brand. You'll see that there's sort of brick elements. Equally, there will be cement board, meaning there won't be vinyl siding on this. It's good quality materials. It's a market that our clients, when they use this brand, they put it in locations that warrant that kind of quality and sort of demand that type of quality. This is an example of the 4-story building. So the first 2 buildings that are closest to Coley David. Again, not sure how visible it would be from Coley Davis with the Harpeth, especially during the summer. And then also wanted to share the 3-story. So the remaining buildings further in the side sort of show this 3-story effect with, you'll see some opportunities for balconies, good placemaking, also good views out into these open spaces and some of this park dedication that we hope to have. With respect for the time of the presentation, I by design try to keep this really minimal. We have a lot more we could share and could probably go on for hours, but we wanted to really reserve some time for Q&A. With that said, we will turn this back over. I think Anna's going to coordinate some of the questions, and we have the design team here to help respond to those questions. We'll also be taking good notes of this video, and as Alan mentioned, this is our first meeting. This is one of many, and we're excited to get in front of you. We do think this is a win-win-win. It's a win for the property seller. It's a win for the property purchaser, and most importantly, it's a win for the community. It provides a lot of opportunities for everyone. With that said, we'll turn this over to Q&A, and if you'd like, I can share the screen, or I could stop and just let me know if we need to share the screen.
Yeah, go ahead and stop sharing for now, and we will. I want to make sure if the council members wanted to say any more. I know Councilmember Hauser, did you want to speak at this point? She's getting logged on. While we're waiting for her to respond, I think Logan Elliott, who's reviewing the rezoning, had a quick clarification to add on the Metro Park side of things.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I just wanted to speak to the land that's proposed to potentially be dedicated to Metro Parks that's on this site, the area within the floodplain and floodway. That land would need to go through the Metro Parks Board and would need a consideration. So at this point, we're not sure if Metro Parks would be willing to accept that land or what that land would be used for. There was some talk about potentially having soccer fields on that or something to that effect, but at this point, we're not sure if Metro Parks would accept that or what that land would be used for. So there are ideas for the land, but it's not included with the rezoning application or anything like that. At this point, it's a high-level discussion about potentially dedicating that to Metro.
Thanks, Logan. So I'm going to have Anita help me. There's been a number of questions submitted. Just as a reminder, look on the right side of your screen if you're on the computer, and you can type in questions to everyone. You can also hit the raise your hand button, and we can unmute you. So please do both of those. But I know there's a number of questions. So Anita, if you want to get us started, that would be great.
Sure. Thanks, Anna. We have several questions about, would Morton Mill Road be connected into the development?
I can field that, Anita. Morton Mill Road would not be connected. It is only an emergency access drive, and that's being coordinated with CSX. So a permit would have to be granted by CSX as well. So we're having those conversations. There's an existing at-grade crossing for the resident that currently lives there, and we'd be utilizing that as a emergency access only. As Scotty had said earlier, if for whatever reason you couldn't utilize the bridge that we built and there was an emergency, they could come from Morton Mill, or if there was an emergency and Morton Mill had gotten cut off, they could come through us to get to Morton Mill. So that's the only use that would be offered under. So there would be no common flow of traffic, and it would not be a public right of way. It would be a emergency access ingress egress easement.
Thanks, Alan, because yes, a few people have noted that the area even just a few weeks ago flooded severely, and also back in March flooded both Morton Mill and Coley Davis as well. A more specific question, does this proposed bridge introduce a stoplight in a high traffic area of Coley Davis? Is that something you all know yet?
Yeah, Brandon, you can speak to that. We have conducted a traffic impact study. Brandon, if you want to speak to that.
Yes, I can do that. Brandon Baxter, also with Reagan Smith, as Alan mentioned, we have conducted a traffic impact study. The traffic from this development and on Coley Davis does not meet the traffic signal warrants. So the connection of the development to Coley Davis will have a stop sign on the connection, but there will be no stop sign or traffic signal added to Coley Davis. So it'll continue to flow as it does past that access, with the people exiting the site having to stop and wait their turn to enter that traffic.
Thank you. Continuing on, Morton Mill. Will Morton Mill Road be used by construction vehicles to access the site during construction?
And I can speak to that one, Anita. This was a big item that Councilman Rosenberg wanted to make sure we addressed, and was very thorough with us when we were at the very beginning, when we were trying to understand how to execute. And what we've looked at is it would be utilized in terms of bridge construction. We had to access that side for the bridge. Once the bridge is constructed, all vertical construction and any additional construction will come through that bridge. So I guess the answer is yes, it will be for bridge construction. No, it will not be for site construction. So we would minimize any kind of inconvenience as much as possible.
Okay. Let's see here. Where is the stormwater retention area?
All right, and Lee, are you still on?
I am. Scotty, can you bring the imagery back up?
Yeah, well, we'll have to bring the plan up to show you that, but Lee can review that.
Should be shared now.
Sure, I'll see it. So the apartment complex you see is kind of vertically shaped. We have 3 detention ponds on the site. There's one east of the bottom 2-building block. There's one east of the middle 3-building block, and one north of the north 2-building block. So there's 3 different areas, and those 3 areas would be down the slope from those from the apartment buildings.
And in addition to that, Lee, correct me if I speak out of turn, there are water quality ponds, which are basically you're building on-site water filters in the green areas or the quad areas that you see between the buildings in this project.
That's correct, yes. The treatment areas will be within the building footprints or within the green space between the buildings. The stormwater quantity detention areas are on that perimeter, kind of down the slope from the buildings.
Okay, thank you. We going back to Morton Mill Road. We have a question about, will there be a restricted covenant on the property regarding the gated access?
We, quite frankly, hadn't gotten to that detail, but there will be a restriction in the access, yes. So yeah, there will be a guaranteed restriction that is for emergency only. In terms of what that covenant looks like, we haven't gotten to that detail, but that's something we would work through Metro and be a condition of our approval before moving forward.
Would that restriction be part of the zoning, part of the SP?
I mean, it could be from our end. In terms of the actual legal document, because it's probably going to be in a form of an easement, and that would probably be reflected in a plat. So let's say Metro accepts the land dedication, we're going to have to subdivide the property. So we would come in with a plat that legally subdivides it. That plat would also include all associated easements, ingress, egress, utility, and water maintenance easements as well. All those would come together on that plat, and that would legally control that access. But yeah, I mean, that's something that we certainly could agree to as part of the SP, and it would be a requirement of our zoning.
Right. Responding to that, as well as another question about that, how do we know that this plan wouldn't change in the future? The SP process allows for conditions and for plans to be included with the zoning. So the specific plan zoning would be the law for the land. So things like access could be controlled and required with the SP zoning. That would be a legal requirement that Metro would enforce. So things like that can be controlled through the rezoning application.
Thanks, Logan. Alan, this is perhaps a question for you. Some people are asking about more details of the win-win. Why is it a win for the community beyond just Greenway access?
Well, Greenway access is, in my opinion, a huge win, but it's more than just the access. It's being able to activate the park that Metro currently owns, which is the 51-acre park you see immediately to our west. But then the ability to even add on another 20 acres. So anytime you add parks into our community and you have the ability to activate those, whether it be a passive park, whether it be an active park, like our soccer fields or like Percy Warner, that brings value to our community. And to have the ability to actually do that brings a huge value. So greenways are great, but greenways without any destination from one end to the other, it's just a path, and maybe that's beneficial, maybe it's not. The dynamics of being able to have a destination, such as the soccer fields, such as Ensworth, such as the baseball fields, such as Percy Warner Park, when you have destinations along these greenways, that just activates it and elevates it in terms of value associated with the greenway itself. So anytime that I feel like we can bring in a 70 acres worth of park. So right now we have 51 acres. Who uses that 51 acres? Well, right now you would have to park in the HYS parking lot behind Home Depot, walk up to where the concession stand is, cross a pedestrian bridge, which takes you to kind of an open field for soccer field. But you still have that 51 acres of land there that could be Percy Warner-esque type property. But without access, it's just a large point of land. So that's the value I see. Anytime we can add a significant amount of parks in our community and activate it. And keep in mind, we're talking about getting access to this property, and property given to us, granted, is floodplain, but that's a lot of what makes up most park systems. But we're getting a $4 million bridge on top of that. That's not a bridge that we're going to pay for with taxpayer money. We've been looking for that for 20 years. It's not going to happen. We don't want to pay for it with taxpayer money. But if you do kind of a private-public partnership, which is kind of what we're talking about here, you got the private marketplace coming in and saying, you know what, I can do this for you, and I can give you this. And what we need is assistance to be able to do our community. So that's how I see it as a win. So we win as a community. The Cypress Brook that's coming in with their residential development, they win. And here's another key component, and I failed to mention it earlier. We were all there when our mall died on the vine. I remember the week before Christmas going shopping for my kids and coming down the escalator, and I could count everybody I saw through the center of that mall in one hand, right? And you just knew, we got a big dead mall. That mall sat there for 10 years before we finally tore it down. Now we have one Bellevue place. We have new infusion of new restaurants. We have a new theater. We have the Ford's Ice Center. All that, we have that because we have the ability to have patrons go to this area and feed those restaurants and feed that theater. They're approximately just over a half mile away, maybe a mile from one Bellevue Center. So when we bring in families like this, and we give them an opportunity to live in our community, to fill our restaurants and give it substantial viability from an economic standpoint, we create a dynamic there. So to me, it's a huge win. But, that's my perspective. I understand, other people may have a different perspective there, but looking at the bigger picture, it's an enormous win for Bellevue as a community. But that's my perspective. So.
Thanks, Alan. A question about noting that the CSX Railroad is a barrier. So how will the Greenway cross it?
That is an excellent question. This site is filled with questions, by the way, and that is another permit process that we'll have to file with CSX and get the ability to figure out how that's going to cross. Right now, the Greenway stops right where the railroad bridge goes over the Harpeth River. And is there a possible way to swing a boardwalk under it? I don't know. That would be a detail we'd have to look at. Most of you guys who walk on the Greenway know that the majority of the Greenway right along Morton Mill is a boardwalk system Greenway. It's cantilevered out over close to where the river is, just because of slopes. So in some instances, you have to get creative with how you access those points. A good example would be where you park at the Greenway head on the other side of Old Harding Pike, away from the driving range. You get on the trail and you go under the Old Harding Pike Bridge. So, we haven't worked out all those details. This is very high level, our first conversation. But there's a way to do it. There is a solution there, and we'll figure out that detail once we get to it. But that would be my first thought.
Let's stop and take some questions from people with their hands up. Can we unmute Devin Schultz?
Hello, good evening. Thanks for taking the time to explain some of this. I guess I have a number of points, and I mentioned this to Councilman Rosenberg earlier in the week. I received notice in the mail on this, but my next door neighbor did not, because he's not within the fictitious 1,250-foot line from this subject property. So to the extent that this is a community meeting, I think that we've done the community a disservice in failing to properly notify people. We have done what we can to include the attendees, but hearing that there are only 49 attendees on the call strongly suggests that this was insufficiently noticed to the community. Now, I'm sure the 1,250-foot line is established somewhere in some ordinance or some part of the code, but it's not meaningful in this case because the community that will be affected is well beyond 1,250 feet. And the idea that my neighbors who share the same road that I do did not receive a notice while I did strikes me as, well, beyond odd. So that's the first thing. I think we ought to, I think the council members ought to address that independently because it's their constituents after all. With respect to the property itself, I find it a little perplexing that the chief benefit to the community, as if you go back and you rewatch this, was the connection to the Greenway. A couple things on that. There is nothing preventing the Greenway from going through the Metro government property that's already owned by Metro. It does not have to go through the Fucell property at all. It would be a few additional feet from the existing stub, but that's all. And it would not add significant additional cost, I don't believe. So the idea that this is somehow necessary to connect the Greenway is not, frankly, honest. It's easy to connect the Greenway through the Metro government property that is already owned. I think the most important part of this whole project, though, is the safety of the community that would be affected. I would encourage the council members to look up on YouTube, or there's plenty of government documents related to it, the flooding of a town in Illinois called Marseilles. It's spelled like Marseille in France, Marseilles. You can watch plenty of video where the U.S. Army Corps operated the dam in error, and it ended up flooding the property in its entirety, or flooding the town rather in its entirety. We can talk about no rise certifications from FEMA, which I would like Alan to answer that question too. He suggested that it will not cause any rise in the property or in the river levels, but I'm curious as to whether or not the FEMA certification has actually been obtained yet, or if that was a statement that was based on hope rather than fact. But I would encourage the council members to review the Marseilles incident where an entire town flooded. If a small error were to happen with the operation of the locks and dams in Tennessee, you would create essentially a stranded island of 417 apartments that would not have access off of that property. We've seen that property flood already several times. You can add a bridge. The bridge will somehow have to connect to the property that would be underwater. I don't know how many cars would be pertinent to a 417 unit development, but probably at least 417. And getting that many cars off of property in a sudden flood situation is dangerous. And last time I checked, the city is liable to be sued on such a basis. But I'll conclude my remarks there, but I would like those questions answered, please.
Who do you want to go first, Anita?
Well, it's
council members or myself?
Well, let's go with the FEMA certification first, please.
Okay, so we are required to design by the 100-year floodplain. You're correct. The property did flood where there is floodplain. It even in the May 10 flood, it was still dry along that area. And you can go back and visually see that. And that was a 1,000-year flood. I just want to repeat that, 1,000-year flood. There's a means in which we create, design, and plan as a community, and that means has been deemed to be the 100-year flood. In terms of how we design this, we'll have to work with Metro's engineering department to justify the stormwater we catch and the fact that we're holding it before we release it to a point that is no greater than what's occurring today. And we'll have to prove that in terms of what we send in. And in terms of FEMA certification, we're working off the FEMA maps. Unless we're going to modify that floodplain or move that floodplain, which we could do. If we did that, we'd have to request a LOMR, which is a letter of map. Help me, Lee. Letter of map.
It's a letter of map revision.
Thank you. Letter of map revision. So, and if we did something like that, we then have to provide calculations to FEMA. They have to assess those calculations and say, okay, yes, you can shift that. And then after we shift it, we would then have to survey that area to show that we shifted it the way that we said we would, and then submit it to FEMA for final acceptance of adjustment to the floodplain. Well, we're not proposing to do that. So at the end of the day, we cannot cause waters to rise any greater than they are currently. And the best we can do is work with our representatives at Metro, which are trained and skilled in this area. You know, I hear what you're saying about the locks and the dams, and I mean, yeah, sure. We can't control that. But I do know in the worst flood that this community's ever seen, this area was still dry for the most part, all along that particular area.
Well, excuse me for interrupting, but both of the ingress and egress points that you've proposed during the 1,000-year flood were not dry. So that's the point.
Yeah, I would agree. During the 1,000-year flood, and that's a valid point. I'll agree to that. You know, it did come up into Morton Mill, but those houses you see on Morton Mill right there, they were out of the water.
No, they were not. No, they were absolutely not.
From the picture I saw from that.
Well, I was living here and they were well in the water, and I'm sure that some of them are probably on the call and will let you know how many hours they spent repairing their homes. It was up about, I think, 9 or 10 houses down that road. That's not a factual statement.
Well, no, I get that. I'm going by the picture shown, but that being said, again, that's a 1,000-year event, and we designed for that 100-year. Yeah, so that's kind of what we're looking at there.
I'll jump in real quick. Now, I just want to jump in real quick, Devin, and hit your, we often hear the point about notification. You know, over the years, we've certainly increased the buffer area, but we hear you with that. That's why we rely on a lot of other means with the neighborhood leaders and council members and everything, getting the word out. But we hear you on that notice of neighbors is very important. We have a lot more questions.
And Anita, I do want to say we sent out over 500. We sent out over 500 invitations to this meeting. So we didn't send out 149 showed up. We sent out over 500. So we certainly weren't trying to keep people from attending this meeting. This meeting is to get feedback. I mean, that's why we're here tonight. So go ahead.
Right. No, absolutely. We have a good turnout for this. You know, sometimes it is literally only a handful of people that attend these meetings. So it's great to have such a good turnout. Let's hear from Dory, who also has her hand raised.
Oh, hello. Can you all hear me? This is Dory Bowles from the Harpeth Conservancy. Awesome. Actually, Devin brought up some of my points, so I just want to focus on flooding. And I think we're working on this right now on the Harpeth and Franklin. And the probabilities have changed. It's not really probably a correct representation to say that the 2010 flood was a 1,000-year storm event. All these probabilities are changing with all the increase in rain events. So all of these statistics for stormwater and designing a cut and fill are changing. And I know that Metro is working on that right now over in the flood side, Roger, Lindsay, and others. So I think the biggest challenge here is truly safety. And there were people who drowned in Somerset Farms and others because it's the only way in and out is Coley Davis, and it's in the floodwaters. So that's as an organization, our biggest concern on some of the floodway design is safety at this point. You know, it's not like they're going to be able to get in and out on Morton Mill if it's only being designed for emergency access. So it's a tough spot to develop with this kind of density because it's in the floodway, and I don't know what else to say.
Hey, Dory, Alan here.
Yeah, hey, Alan, by the way, and everybody, hi.
Hey, yeah, I appreciate you chiming in. I mean, you make some good points. Again, we're talking about and I hear what you're saying. The dynamics are changing, but it was a 1,000-year event, and you know we're designing to the 100-year, and hopefully, you know, really to a conservative level. But, you know, I hear what you're saying.
I think the hard part is how can we have Coley Davis this is the thing. We've got these constraints. I-40 is a berm. That's why the floodwaters are where they are now. So there's not a whole lot it's expensive. I mean, redesign Coley Davis. I mean, that's there's only so much we can do. We're kind of living with certain constraints. CSX, CDA, and Coley Davis and I-40.
No, I mean, that's if you get into that, that absolutely, that is a big cost in terms of Coley Davis. But, you know, back during that flood, it felt like it took out a third of Bellevue. Our neighborhood was isolated for about a week without power. And a lot of Bellevue was like that. And I know Hendersonville suffered issues like that. All I can speak to is that was a very abnormal event, to the point that, you know, it would be identified as a 1,000-year event. And Lee, could you speak to, you know, who comes in and says, okay, that's a 1,000-year event, and what does that mean?
Sure. So the 100-year, 500, 1,000-year events, those are based on historical data that's collected over the years, and it's based on the different rain gauges and river gauges that the state and the federal government has throughout rivers throughout the country. And they use those rain gauges to continually update their models based on recorded rain events and their effects on the rivers and the rise in the water level. She is correct. The data has been changing over the last few years. I did check. The current flood map for this area is from 2017, so it was updated 7 years since the flood that occurred in this area. And we've seen that in a lot of places in Middle Tennessee where they've updated those maps. And we've actually seen some areas in Middle Tennessee where those maps were updated perhaps aggressively and have now been walked back a little bit to be less aggressive. But certainly that is a concern in this area, the 1,000-year flood and the effect that it had on this location. As Alan mentioned, it's an extremely rare event. I think the previous time that it happened, that an event that large happened, was I think in the 1950s, perhaps, and it was before the Cumberland River and the Harpeth River were flood controlled by the TVA and the dams that they installed. So since the TVA moved into this area and brought their flood control with them, that event has only happened one time in that long history. So it is a very rare event, and it is not something that you expect to ever happen again. Obviously, it could, but it's not something that you would expect.
Yeah, and I think we had a storm sit on top of basically Middle Tennessee, but Nashville for 3 days straight, raining as hard as it could. We got 18 inches. I mean, it's absolutely unheard of. So
that's what Roger Lindsay and Aaron Rogie and others are pointing out, is that with these atmospheric rivers, you're getting 4 and 5 and 6 inch rain events that can happen in a 1 or 2 square mile area. I mean, so all I'm saying is that I think the way we're all working on floodplain analysis and everything else is going to have to shift. We have more intense rain events. It's the reality of this part of the country. And I'm sorry, there's no way I'd have anybody I know buy an apartment in this area on the first floor. No way.
All right. Well, I appreciate the input, Dory.
Okay, let's take a question from Doug, who has his hand up.
Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I'll be really quick. I really appreciate the Nashville Planning Commission being on the call tonight. And I'm just going to make a couple of points that I'd ask them to take into consideration when they make their final determinations. A couple of points have already been brought out, but the ingress and egress is really problematic with B. Just having really one point of ingress and egress. I realize you have the emergency backup, but you are looking to go either under or over or across a CSX railroad. And in my personal experience, that is not always an automatic thing to cross a railroad, to get an agreement to cross a railroad. I mean, what if a train should stop in that area at a most inopportune time? I realize it's not a floodplain today, but, we saw recent articles that said that climate change, there's some impact of climate change that it's already too late to change. And the 1,000-year flood just happened 11 years ago. So you know, I just want to say that based on my experience living here in Bellevue, the flood situation is trending worse rather than better. As far as the Greenway goes, I think there's a plan to get to the Greenway without this deal. As an area resident, I'd be glad to help pay for a bridge without adding more apartments to the area to connect to that Greenway. And my last point I would make has to deal with the number of apartments that we've seen built in Bellevue. As a Bellevue resident, I'd like to see some sort of pause on apartment development, some sort of apartment moratorium development until we kind of do an analysis of the community plan and kind of see where we're at right now with the number of apartment doors versus the number of apartment or single family doors. I'm a big believer in home ownership, and one of the big needs of the greater Nashville area right now is home ownership, affordable home ownership. I'd probably be more open to a plan of this kind, I sincerely mean it, if it were not apartments, but actually some homes, some single family homes. But you still would have the ingress and egress issues, you still would have the flood issues. But as a Bellevue resident, I would really like to see us kind of take a pause on apartment building. When you look down Highway 70 in Charlotte and up and down Old Hickory, I think we really need to take a further analysis as far as where we're at right now with the number of apartment buildings in Bellevue versus number of single family homes. I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and Anita, I'll speak to one thing on that. And I appreciate your comments, Doug. That the ingress egress, and he said, you know, it's questionable whether you get over CSX. Well, we agree. If we can't make that work, this project has to have a second point of access. So that's a key aspect to this, and we understand that. So we don't disagree with them there.
And Anita, this is Alan. Just 1 second. Sorry, this is Anna with planning. I just wanted to jump in because I know I'm seeing some comments that we're running long, and I understand that. I just want to reassure those that are still on the call, and if you have to jump off, that we are saving the transcript of the questions, and I will share that around with the applicant team and the members of Metro Planning and Metro Parks and Metro Council, so that if we didn't get to your question tonight, that it will have been seen and they can reach out and respond. The appropriate person can reach out and respond. And it sounds, based on the 84 questions we have, as well as all the hands raised, that there's a lot more meetings and discussions that need to happen. So I just want to reassure, if you have to hop off the call and we didn't directly respond to your question, that we have it saved following this, and we will do our best to get back to you.
Absolutely. That was going to be one of my questions, Anna, is how late do you want to go? I'm jumping ahead in the queue a little bit to ask a question about how will utilities be connected to the property? I think they're getting at a lot of challenges there. You've got to connect water, sewer, electricity, everything.
Right, and we've coordinated with Harpeth Valley Utility District. Scotty, you may want to go into more detail on that.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, and Lee can go through it as well, but essentially the short version is there would be some utilities that would cross below the CSX railroad to connect to the public water and public sewer that's currently in place.
And that's to the southwest of our site, correct?
Yes, yeah, we would be tying sort of due south of what we shared today on the screen.
Okay. But yeah, that's being coordinated with Harpeth Valley Utility District on both water and sewer.
Anna, there's still a lot of questions left. Did you want to wrap up this meeting, and the applicants can work with the council members on another meeting, or do we want to hear from the council members?
I think let's hear from the council members, and then the applicant and council members can work on scheduling future meetings, but if Councilmember Rosenberg and then Councilmember Hauser would like to have some comments as we wrap up, that would be great.
Well, thank you, Anna, Anita, Logan, everybody from planning for your work on this. And thanks everybody for your questions, the ones that have been answered and the other ones that are still outstanding. There are a lot of issues to address before this has any hope. The plan, and I know I've talked to some of you in Morton Mill already, would be to try to schedule an in-person meeting down there at the end of Morton Mill so we can see things in 3D, which, I think is a lot more useful and makes it easier to answer some of these questions. And I'm also curious, a couple of folks mentioned ideas of getting the Greenway finished without going through the Fussell property, and I'm intrigued and interested to hear that. One of the things that made me feel comfortable bringing this to the community is the fact that on my time on the council, the thing that I've heard about most but have not gotten any traction on was getting the Greenway over to the other side of Bellevue. And the current property owner is less than helpful or cooperative or civic minded. And so that's really been a real sticking point. And, I think being able to reach the Frisk Park and having new soccer fields is a benefit too. But I'm really curious to hear everybody's thoughts, and especially those of you who are much more directly impacted by this. So thank you all for your time, and I look forward to hearing from you all and talking soon.
I think you might be muted, Councilmember Hauser. Let's see.
There we go.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Yes, I do agree with David. I think this has been a really good first meeting and discussion and throwing it out. And no matter what new plan is brought to you, a new plan brings up all kinds of uncertainty and questions. And the thing about that is people think of different.
I think we're having some connection issues. Sorry, Councilmember Hauser. Yeah, I think we lost connectivity with you. So if you're able to call in maybe on a phone real quick, maybe we can hear his last. We lost connection with you. Okay. Okay. So yes, I just want to reassure the community that your questions, we've tried to get to as many of them as we could, and I see that there are many, many more. So we will do our best to get the responses to you. It sounds like future meetings and discussions are needed to be had before we would reconvene with the planning department. So we're gonna have those meetings occur and see what progress is made. But we really appreciate your attendance tonight. And I hope everyone stays safe and has a good rest of their evening. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Anna.
Thank you.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information about this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.